Just start again. There we go. All right. We'll cut you some slack, Bruce. Give you an opportunity to express yourself.
I just want to set forth some of the personal experiences and my relationship with the public school system here in British Columbia that shape my views, as I'm sure I'm not alone among many members in that approach. I was educated in public schools in Vancouver, and my sister, similarly, I have but one sibling. She was educated in public schools in Vancouver. And in fact, she's now a teacher in the city of Surrey. She started out as a teacher on call in the 80s, and that required her for, I think, about 7 years, because there were very few permanent positions in that time, to wait each morning to be called before she could go out to work as a teacher, if indeed there was work available. My late mother was a teacher, although she went back to school in her mid-40s. She'd ended her university education a bit prematurely, and then decided in her mid-40s to go back to University of British Columbia, complete a degree in teaching, and went on to teach in Vancouver at a variety of schools. And perhaps she too was shaped by public schools here in British Columbia. She actually studied in a one-room school in Evelyn, British Columbia, just outside Smithers, and took several years of correspondence in the higher levels, because there was no high school education in the local community, and completed a final year in Prince Rupert, her grade 12 year. My father was a graduate of the old normal school, which was the teacher training ground in Vancouver, and taught for several years at Templeton in the east end of Vancouver, before he went on to other employment in a different job. My wife herself attended public schools in Vancouver, except for several years when she went to a parochial school, a Catholic school, because it was French-speaking, and her parents thought it important that she learn to speak French. My 3 children have all attended public schools in Surrey and in New Westminster. So, indeed, in the neighborhood, my neighborhood, I have 2 friends who live around the corner, both one a retired public school teacher now, and another one who's just about to retire, Claude Mongeon and Jude Campbell. And across the street in my neighborhood, as I've watched grow up, a daughter of our neighbors who went through public school in Surrey and went on to veterinarian school, and is now an established veterinarian back here in British Columbia. So I'm well aware of the impact of the public school system, and I say that as a choice for myself. I'm aware that some parents choose to send their children to other religiously based schools which receive some public funding. I don't condemn that choice, but for myself and my family, it's been public schools. So I think it's important just to, when we approach those problems, we naturally bring that experience to bear on the questions. And I want to begin by looking at the court decision that informs a very important part of the background. And despite what some members may think about the judiciary, I think it's generally agreed that a judge brings a dispassionate, rational, and informed view to the dispute, and makes a decision based on evidence. And the challenge of Bills 27 and 28 is a rather long and torturous tale. It began with the introduction of legislation in 2002, and that, along with Bill 29, Bill 29 was a bill that changed labor relations dramatically in the health sector, led to the mass firing, the single biggest layoff of female workers in the history of the country. That was challenged in the courts and went all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. and the legislation was struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada. The companion legal action challenging Bills 27 and 28, the bills that were focused on the education sector, was held in abeyance until that decision was made and then went forward. Madam Justice Griffin issued a decision almost a year ago, and hence some urgency in the sense that the decision requires the legislature to react to that decision by April 13th, 2012. The decision was given on April 13th, 2011. Very comprehensive decision, 103 pages. It reviews at some considerable length and in some detail with the history of bargaining, beginning with recognition of BCTF as the bargaining agent in 1987, the history of bargaining since that date forward, and a very detailed analysis of the bills and the impugned provisions of the bills. But it is significant because this is really devoid of political rhetoric, the analysis that the court engages in. And I want to turn now to some of the provision, or some of the direct quotations from the decision itself, because I think it gives a better flavor of what was at issue in the case and what the court found. One of the outstanding issues before the court was the issue to which the substance of class size and composition could be legitimately negotiated. And from the perspective of teachers involved, class size and composition is very fundamental to the working conditions of a classroom teacher. And indeed, the judge captures that in a couple of paragraphs, which I think are worthy of note here. And this is quoting Irene Lazinger, who was then the president and of the BCTF, and then the judge goes on to comment and come to her own conclusions based on some of that evidence. I'm on page 73 of the decision, paragraph 286. Ms. Lazinger pointed out that teachers are responsible for assessing the educational needs of each individual student in their class and ensuring those needs are met. They must take into account the physical and emotional well-being of their students, maintain order in the classroom, and ensure that the environment is conducive to learning for all students. Accordingly, the number and composition of students in each class is a critical element of their working conditions. Ms. Lazinger's evidence made it clear that teachers are supportive of the integration of special needs students so long as class sizes are adjusted accordingly and proper support is provided, such as teaching assistants. The judge goes on to say, the teacher's work is done both inside and outside of the classroom. Teachers must prepare lessons and learning materials, assess individual student progress, arrange special assistance for students in need, perform administrative tasks and marking, and meets outside of classroom hours with students and parents to discuss learning outcomes and disciplinary issues. Increases in class size not only impact the management of the classroom, they also result in a greater workload. Those effects are compounded the greater number of special needs integrated into the classroom and the fewer the supports from non-enrolling teachers, special assistants, and other support staff. The judge goes on to say in the next paragraph, the number of hours of work required of the worker to perform his or her job is one of the most fundamental of working conditions. In health services, the Supreme Court of Canada referred to the typographer's strike of 1872, calling for a 9-hour day as initiating legislation that marked the beginning of the era of tolerance and protection of workers' organizations in Canada. The Canadian Trade Unions Act of 1872 protected workers from criminal prosecution for conspiracy based solely on attempts to influence the rate of wages, hours of work, and other aspects of the work relation. So one can see from these comments that the right to bargain work conditions is indeed goes back a century and a half in Canadian law. The judge goes on to say in paragraph 290, here all the subjects of subsections 8 and 9 of the PEFCA, that's the relevant legislation at the time, and the section 5 of the Amendment Act dealing with class size and composition, non-enrolling teacher ratios and workload directly affect teachers' hours of work. The more children in a classroom, the greater the number of special needs children in a classroom or reduced support from other teaching specialists correspondingly increases the amount of time the classroom teacher must spend outside of the classroom in preparing for the class, marking and preparing individualized lesson plans. The court goes on to say the length of the school day and the days of the year that the teachers must work are also clearly fundamental to a teacher's working conditions. School boards are given virtually absolute power to determine these issues by virtue of Section 15 of the PEFCA. It must be acknowledged that teachers retain some limited processes after the challenge legislation. Teachers could negotiate in a very limited and undefined way some manner and consequences of school board decisions regarding class size and composition, non-enrolling ratios, and workload. Teachers could file a grievance if the school board exceeded the legislated class size limit. Local teachers also had to be consulted on the school calendar that varied from the standard before the board could exercise its absolute powers regarding hours of work and days of work. I will return to the impact of these matters when I analyze the issue of whether or not the legislation minimally impaired the charter right to freedom of association. However, these matters do not preserve any process similar to collective bargaining over the matters removed from the scope of collective bargaining by the challenge legislation. And then the judge goes on to say, taking away the right to bargain these matters seriously eroded the bargaining strength of teachers and increased the bargaining strength of the employer. Without the ability to collectively bargain these issues, teachers can have little individual influence over these matters. Commentators, commissioners of inquiry such as Corbyn, labor tribunals nationally and internationally, as well as the courts, recognize that a fundamental precept of collective bargaining is an equality of bargaining strength. In health services, the court cited an early article by then Professor Boralaskin as follows, and Boralaskin, many will know, went on to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. Collective bargaining is a procedure through which the views of workers are made known, expressed through representatives chosen by them, not through representatives selected or nominated or approved by employers. More than that, it is a procedure through which terms and conditions of employment may be settled by negotiations between an employer and his employees on the basis of a comparative equality of bargaining strength. The judge then goes on to say in paragraph 295, it is clear from the history of teachers' labor relations that they have long considered their working conditions a significant priority to be negotiated collectively, and this includes the conditions of class size and composition, non-enrolling ratios, and hours of work. I conclude, and this is the important part, I conclude the legislation purging the collective agreement of these matters and prohibiting future collective bargaining over these matters interfered with the teachers' right to come together to collectively pursue goals and significantly undermine the teachers' 2 sub D charter guarantee of freedom of association. So